Today we are going to talk about what is called SILA. SILA is our behavior, how we behave. Now today there is a subject called psychology, and this subject called psychology has been defined by the psychologists as the study of human behavior. So, human behavior is something that is very important to study. Why people behave in certain ways. There have been psychologists of different kinds who have been expressing their views about human behavior. Now, when we speak of behavior, it is important to know what is called the motive. That means when a human being behaves in a certain way, there is a reason why that person behaves in that way. The reason why is what is called motive. Something makes the person behave in a certain way. If you study what is called physics or even what you call mechanics, you begin to study about Isaac Newton. Now, Isaac Newton was a scientist in the 16th and 17th centuries. That was the time when people in the West began to understand a very important natural law. And this natural law was called determinism. Determinism is an important natural law which is the basis of all modern scientific thinking, scientific inventions, scientific discoveries. All that is based on this very important natural law, which is called determinism. And when these human beings began to understand this natural law, something happened to the human beings. Now, in the Western history of the Western society, that period has been called the Age of Enlightenment. It's called the Age of Enlightenment because people were enlightened. Why? Up to this period, people in the West, they were not really thinking properly. They were mainly believing in traditional dogmas. Dogmas are things that are believed blindly, without thinking. So these traditional dogmas have been believed, and this was the time, this age of enlightenment was the time when science began. And when science began, they came to know this law called determinism. And what this law says is that everything that happens in the world happens due to the presence of the necessary conditions. Whatever happens in the world happens only when the necessary conditions are present. Not just one condition, several conditions must be present for something to happen. In ancient times, people thought that this world was governed by supernatural spirits. When it rains, they thought some spirit that they call God is throwing water down from the sky or heaven. When there was thunder and lightning, they thought God was angry. That is why they are making such noises. Sometimes this lightning comes and maybe set fire to a home, or maybe a forest fire starts. When that happens, they are frightened that God is very angry for some reason. And when there is an earthquake, again people thought this is because God was angry over something. So like that, everything that happened in the world happened due to these supernatural gods or devils doing things. That's what they thought. But with the coming of science, when people began to discover things, they began to realize that everything that happens in the world happens not due to these supernatural spirits or gods. It happens when the necessary conditions are present. So when they realized that this was happening due to the necessary conditions when present, they now know why rain comes down. They began to learn that rain is coming from the clouds, and the clouds contain water in the form of water vapor. And when this water vapor begins to cool, it comes down. So becoming cool is one of the conditions, and water being present in the clouds is another condition. So like that, several conditions are necessary for this rain to come down. And how did the water go to the clouds? They began to realize that that is also because the water evaporates. Even the water in the ocean comes up when it evaporates, because it becomes water vapor. And this water vapor comes down, and that is how there is water in the rivers. Where did the water come into the river? Again, it's coming down from these clouds. And when it rains, the rivers get collected. So you see, the reason why things happen came to be known. So some people even created a verse. There was an English verse that said, God said, "Let there be Newton," and Newton came and told the world that everything happens due to the presence of the necessary conditions. You see, so Newton became like the Buddha in those days to the people in the West. But long before the Westerners came to know about this law of determinism, people in India came to know about this, because it was the Buddha who brought this message to the world, and the Buddha called this Paticca Samuppada, today translated as dependent origination. That thing called dependent origination is the same thing as determinism. So when people in the West began to hear about this and understand this, they lost faith in the religious dogmas. When they lost faith in the religious dogmas, there were even revolutions that took place. It's not only what is called the scientific revolution, or even other kinds of revolution took place in England, in France, in even Russia, the Marxist revolution took place. And in this revolution there was killing. Some people started killing the priests in the churches. They started killing even kings and queens. But this revolution, during the time of the Buddha, more than 2000 years before the Westerners came to know about this, the Buddha brought this to the world. And there was a revolution there also. But not a social revolution here. It was an internal revolution, a revolution in the mind. And that internal revolution transformed people. The people were transformed. Transform means not that the body became different, but the mind became different. And the behavior changed, how people behaved. And that transformation of the human being is what is called becoming an arahant or becoming a Buddha, is a transformation. What is that transformation? We have to understand that when we talk about this transformation, we have to understand what we call the mind. Normally people think there are two things called a mind and a body. But there are no two things. Even modern psychologists are aware that mind and body are not two different things. The mind is the body and the body is the mind. Now, when you think about a motor car, you might buy a new car and bring it home. You keep it somewhere inside a garage or even outside. If you leave it there, even for 100 years, it won't move. You can't go anywhere. If you want the car to move, there must be some very important thing to do. And that important thing is that you have to start the engine. If you don't start the engine, the car won't move. And after starting the engine, maybe you have to drive also. But the important thing is that the engine alone, being there, is not going to help. It has to start working. So in the same way, we might have a body, and the working of this body is the mind. So mind is not a separate thing, just as the working of the engine is not a separate thing. It is the engine that is doing the working. The Buddha used 3 words when referring to the mind. 3 words. Now some people today think that those 3 words are what are called synonyms. What are synonyms? They are 3 different words referring to the same thing. But that is not what it is. Because there is no such thing as mind. What we call the mind is an activity. And there are 3 activities that we refer to as mind. These are 3 different activities of the body that we call the mind. The first activity is what is called perception. Now we have what are called 5 senses: the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the body itself. The whole body becomes a sense organ. The sense of touch. So with the whole body we can touch and feel the touch. But with the eyes we can see. You can't see with the body. You need the eyes. And to hear sounds we need the ears. If the ears are not working, we can't hear sounds. And with the nose we can smell. With the tongue we can taste. But this, what is seen with the eye, the ear can't do. Ear can only hear sounds, just as the eye cannot hear sounds. So each sense organ is doing a different thing. So if each sense organ is doing a different thing, you cannot become aware of the world by using one sense. This is why a blind person will not be able to see the world. Or even a deaf person will not be able to know much about the world. When one sense organ is not working properly, then you can't become aware of the world properly. But That sensory activity is what is called perception. But perception is of one sense organ is different from the perception of another sense organ. This is why messages are going from the different sense organs to the brain. And the brain collects all the messages and forms a concept. Because the brain can begin to think. So by thinking, you can put what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, what you touch, you put them together and you begin to interpret and form a concept about the world. This is the nature of the world. Whenever we see a chair, we think we are only seeing the chair. We are not just seeing the chair. When we say chair, we are not only talking about what I see with the eyes. I also know if I touch how the chair will feel. And I know what the sound is, or the smell, or the taste if I put my tongue there. So all that is included when we see a chair. All the impressions that you get through the senses is included in this word chair. So that is how we become aware of the world. And the world that we become aware of is a concept in our mind. So the whole world that we are talking about is really inside our mind. It's like a camera. The camera can take pictures, and the picture is not something outside there, but inside the camera. So in the same way, when I look and see something, what I see is not something there, but inside. It's a picture. So it's not only the picture. Now, into the picture, I add the sound. So even the sound is not something outside there, it is inside. If I get a smell, that is also inside. If I get a taste, that is also inside. If I feel the touch, that is also inside, not outside. Although we think the world is outside there, but the whole world is just inside. It is an idea in the mind. This is why a certain deva, once deva, you know what a deva is? These are devas from the deva loka or heavens, came to the Buddha to ask a question. This deva came to the Buddha and asked, if you can travel in space, travel in the sky, in space, at a very high speed, do you think we can reach the end of the world? That's what he asked. Then the Buddha said, no, you cannot reach the end of the world by traveling in space. Then this Deva said, you know, this is a great truth that you are telling me, because I have found that. Once before I was born as a Deva, I was a human being. And I was one of these yogis in India, meditating. And I gained certain psychic powers. And I had the ability to travel in space at a very high speed. A very high speed. It's like the speed of light. Now today the scientists say that the highest speed is the speed of light. So with that speed, he could travel in space. And he said, I traveled for 100 years. And died. And when I died, I was born as a Deva. And I know, as you said, by traveling in space, we cannot come to the end of the world. Then the Buddha said, but without coming to the end of the world, you cannot bring all suffering to an end. Without reaching the end of the world, you cannot bring suffering to an end. And then he said, the world, the beginning of the world, the end of the world, and the way leading to the end of the world is in this fathom-long body itself, with its perception and conceptions. So that is what he said, that this whole world, although we think is outside there, it is all inside here. That is what he pointed out. So by traveling in space, you can never reach the end of the world. If you want to reach the end of the world, you have to make a transformation of your mind. It is this transformation of the mind that makes you reach the end of the world. That's the important thing to understand. And that transformation of the mind is what the Buddha achieved. And not only that the Buddha achieved it, he told others how to achieve it themselves. Each person has to do it himself. One cannot do it for another. You have to do it yourself. So the Buddha cannot do it for other people. Each person has to do it by himself or herself. That's the important thing to understand. And this transformation became possible only because the Buddha understood this thing called determinism. That's the important thing to understand. Today the modern scientists are using this knowledge about determinism to transform the world. But they have been able to do something like to turn a fan using electricity, or create a light by just pressing a button and the light comes. Or if you want to go somewhere, you can get into a motor vehicle and go. These are also wonderful things that the scientist has done. But all those things have been done, which is by changing what is going on outside. And by doing that, do you think the sufferings of the world has come to an end? The world is still filled with crime, it's filled with wars, killings, murders. All the troubles are still going on. With all the scientific inventions and discoveries, still the troubles in the world have not stopped. But this same law of determinism, the Buddha used in a different way. He didn't try to transform the world. Although he had certain powers, once Maha, it's a powerful person called Maha, he came to the Buddha and said, "You know, I know that you have a power where if you tell Mount Everest, you know, the highest mountain in the world, that's the Mount Everest. If you tell this Mount Everest, it's just a matter of thinking only. You don't even have to come out with a sound with your mouth. You can only think. May this mountain become a mountain of gold. It will just become a mountain of gold. You have that power. I know that. Please, for the benefit of the world, think that thought and make the mountain, the Himalaya mountain, a mountain of gold." So the Buddha said, "Yes, Maha, I have that power. But if I make that mountain a mountain of gold, what do you think will happen? How many people will be killed? People will start fighting and quarreling to get that gold. So many people, there will be so many wars and so many people trying to get that gold. If you have studied history, you will know that in the United States, there was a thing called the gold rush, where people went to get gold. And they fought and killed so many people to get gold. So if they killed in the United States to get gold, how many people will be killed if the Himalaya mountain became a mountain of gold? So this is why the Buddha didn't try to teach people science. Instead of that, he used the same law of determinism to change the mind, to change the mind of the person. And it is by changing the mind that he was able to change the behavior. You may have heard that there was a man during the time of the Buddha in India who began to kill people. He killed almost 100 people, and each person that he killed, he took the finger and made a necklace of fingers. His name was, you know the name, Angulimala. The Buddha went into the forest to meet him. And there were people who said, "Don't go. You will be killed by that man." He didn't listen to that. He went. And when that man saw the Buddha, he started chasing after the Buddha. He ran after the Buddha. The Buddha was going very slowly. But he couldn't catch him. So he got close and asked the Buddha, "Stop." Why are you moving? The Buddha said, "I have stopped. You are the one who is running." So, of course, it was this man Angulimala who really stopped and asked him to stop going. So he thought, why is this person saying this? And he began to think. He was an intelligent man. And so when the Buddha said, "I have stopped, you are the one who is running." So he began to think. And then the Buddha said, "I have stopped killing people, but you have not stopped." Then only that he realized that he has been killing people and that is not a good thing. And he was ultimately transformed. And he became an arahant. So you see that kind of transformation of the human being, the Buddha was able to do. Why? Because he understood how the mind works. It is by understanding how the mind works that he was able to change the mind. Now, in the modern times, there was a psychologist by the name of Sigmund Freud, a German man. And he is the person who made use of the same law called determinism to deal with the mind. And he created a new word. He called it psychic determinism. Psychic determinism means the determinism of the mind. What he pointed out was that even the human mind is working according to that same law of determinism. What does that mean? Now, according to the Christian doctrine or the teachings of the Christians, they say God gave human beings what is called a free will. Free will means the freedom to act as you want. He said the human being was given the freedom to act as you want. That is called the free will. And then God gave commandments, laws. You should not do certain things. Now, what is the meaning of that? If you are given the freedom to act as you want, then there cannot be laws. But here God gave him laws also. Don't do this, don't do that. And at the same time given free will to do as you want. So what the human beings did was, if they got free will, then they acted as they wanted, and now God became angry and punished them and sent them to hell. So whatever that is, they believe in this thing called free will. But Sigmund Freud, by studying the human mind, said human beings have no free will. You can't act as you want. That is the problem. Why? Why can't you act as you want? Because we have two parts of the mind. One is the thinking part and the other is the emotional part. Now you have, at the beginning, before we started this talk, you took the 5 precepts. You recited the 5 precepts. How many of you really observe the 5 precepts? If you ask your own mind, whether you are really practicing the 5 precepts, you will discover that you are not practicing the 5 precepts. Why? When you get angry, you will be doing all kinds of mischievous things. You might be fighting, quarreling, and you may be doing things maybe against your mother or against your father or maybe against your children or maybe your husband or your wife. Now all these things are happening. Why? Because of anger. When anger comes, you forget the 5 precepts. Or if you become maybe sexually excited, again you may be breaking all the rules. Why? Because when the emotion and the thinking, reasoning comes in conflict, emotion always wins. This is the point. So that means you have no free will. You are not free to act as you want. You may be wanting to practice the 5 precepts, but you can't do it. This is the problem. That means there is no real free will. Everything that you do is dependent